In June 2018, I traveled to Shanghai, China with my two sisters and my sister's fiance. We were planning to meet my auntie for the first time in China since she lived in Laos. So close yet so far. So why not meet up, right? First days rolled by and we met up with each other. Everything was great and we stayed in a hotel that we reserved online for the next few days. My auntie, my younger sister and I stayed in one room, and my sister and her fiance stayed in another room on another floor. The room had a set of beds with one bathroom, a queen-size bed, and a twin-size bed divided by a nightstand in the middle. As the older sister, I asked to sleep alone on the twin bed by myself, while my younger sister and my auntie shared the queen bed. In this particular hotel, the key was a keycard switch. It was to be inserted into the acrylic panel by the door to control the electricity. By the twin bed where I slept, there was one light bulb that was not controlled by the keycard. I slept like a pig on the first night with the light bulb on since I didn't know how to turn it off. Nothing happened. Before we got to the second night, let me add that my auntie is super sweet, and with her being so happy to see both of my sisters and I, she kept complimenting us. She is such a sweet and kind lady, and she would compliment us throughout the day, telling us how beautiful and how pretty we look. Maybe I'm being too superstitious, but as the old folks used to always say, don't compliment each other too much. You may attract something else. Supposedly, you are supposed to say the opposite of what you intend to say. Anyways, back to my story on day 2. I've been on and off with about 4 to 5 hours of sleep since the traveling and the 24-hour time zone difference. My sleep schedule was messed up, but I finally figured out how to turn off the light bulb on top of me, so I turned it off with the rest of the other lights and slept. My auntie slightly woke me up around 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning and said that she wanted to sleep with me as well. I made space for her and she slept behind me. I was turned towards my younger sister, who was sleeping across from me on the queen bed, and my auntie turned facing the wall. After we slept, I had sleep paralysis for what felt like the longest 5 minutes of my entire life. During the sleep paralysis, I saw my auntie, but something was off. I didn't think about it though. She turned towards my back and spooned me, hugging me from behind my back while I was facing the other way. But then, I quickly realized that this wasn't my auntie. It felt like the presence of a man. It didn't realize that I knew that and got on top of me. I started to freak out because it started smiling at me while in the form of my auntie. The only thing I could do was move my fingers. I dug my fingers into its face and my fingers went through it like a fog. It then disappeared. I woke up and brushed it off. I did not fear it because I prayed and I knew the Lord's presence was with me. I was really tired, so I slept. The following morning, I felt uncomfortable to tell my auntie about what happened, so I told my younger sister what happened in English. She was paranoid with me, but I told her that it was nothing and that I didn't fear it because I'm in power of that and that the Lord is always with me. Before I get to the third night, I would like to add that on the first 2 days in the hotel, all of our phones were able to connect to data and we were able to make international calls and listen to music using our data. After the first incident somehow, our phones no longer can access our data and call services. Only outside of the room were we able to access it. Maybe the connection was bad, but if it was that bad, how were we able to access it in the first place? Something to think about. This was the third night. I did not turn off the light bulb after what happened, and I don't know why I slept by myself again. Thank goodness nothing happened. On the fourth night, nothing happened on the fourth night, so I was no longer scared thinking about my previous experience. Like I said, I did not fear it and brushed it off. I thought that maybe it was an experience from my own mind through sleep paralysis and my messed up sleep schedule. But boy was I wrong. It came in again, only this time, maybe, in its real form. It was what looked to be a young to mid-20s and mid-30s Chinese man. It was blue and half naked and had eyes that were pitch black. Suddenly, I woke up. That's when I noticed that it was in front of me, 3 feet away. I was scared at this point and started to blink, and every time I blinked, it moved closer. I was scared, so I don't know why I blinked super fast. Its face flew right into mine. By now I figured if I close my eyes, I won't see it. That was the wrong answer. I still felt its presence, and it jumped out at me. This woke me up. The light bulb was off, and the first thing I did was grab my phone, which was next to me. Instead of waking up my younger sister and my auntie, I tried to turn on my phone for a flashlight. My phone was pitch black. It wouldn't turn on, as if it was turned off. I then held onto the power button, but nothing happened. After 4 attempts, it finally turned on. First thing I did was call my boyfriend on Facebook Messenger. Luckily, he picked up. I immediately told him to keep me company because I just experienced something creepy. He urged me to tell him right away, but I refused. A few minutes rolled by, and my auntie and my younger sister were still asleep, when suddenly I heard something loud drop in the room. I freaked out and told my boyfriend that something dropped, and there was no way in hell I was going to get up and take a look. I ignored it and kept talking with my boyfriend for a few more minutes. I felt a little bit more at ease, so we hung up the phone. I woke my auntie up and slept with her. The next day, I knew better than to tell anyone my experience right away, and especially not in the hotel room like I did before with my younger sister. After we left far away from the hotel that day, I was then able to feel comfortable to tell my 2 experiences to my sisters and my auntie. They told me to just stay positive, and so I did. Last day in the hotel. The 3 of us have already finished packing the night before. We left only a few things out. My auntie finished packing first, though she would go to check on my other sister and her fiance's progress with packing. My younger sister and I packed really quick, doubled and triple-checked if we left anything behind. Nothing left. Good to go, so I made a comment out loud. "We will be back. We have to grab breakfast." My younger sister added, "Yes, we will come back." We took all of the luggages and left downstairs to grab breakfast. In the Hmong culture, as the old folks used to say, whenever you are staying at a place, even if it's only for a few nights, make sure to call yourself, your soul, home and to not stay there. And if you find yourself in a situation where you know something's wrong, you have to lie about returning so something doesn't follow you home. That is why my younger sister and I said that as we were getting ready to return. And I'll also add, before my auntie left to check on my other sister and her fiance, she already called us to not stay here. So while downstairs eating breakfast, my auntie came and said, "Oh, you guys are here? I didn't know you guys already left, so after I checked on your sister and her fiance, I came back to the room and knocked. I knocked a couple of times and no one answered. I kept yelling when I suddenly heard a man's voice coming from inside the room. I was confused because I was sure it was our room. I didn't understand what he was saying because it sounded weird, but I knew it was a man's voice." My younger sister and I were extremely spooked. After that, we left. We traveled to Beijing afterwards, and I realized that I didn't see my purple towel. I was 110% sure we left nothing behind. But it's trash now, like my mother said, after what I told her when we arrived at home in the US. When I was 6 years old, my family lived at an apartment complex. Behind the complex was a creek. Sometimes the creek was very high, and sometimes it was just a trickle. One day, my cousin and I went to play near the water. We always used to joke that there were crocodiles. Sometimes when the creek was low, we would cross over to the other side through the water, and if someone slipped and fell, the crocodile will get them. On that particular day, the creek was too high, so we just decided to throw rocks into it. As my cousin and I were throwing rocks into the creek, I noticed a little Hmong girl standing behind one of the trees, watching us intently. Even though most of the kids that lived at the complex went to school together, I didn't recognize her. The little girl looked as though she was around our age. When she realized that I had seen her, she hid her face behind the tree. Not thinking anything of it, I continued to look for rocks and throw them into the creek. My cousin was sitting on a boulder and had a nice pile of rocks nestled into his shirt. He would then pick out a rock and throw it into the water. I remember being transfixed by his motions, the way he would lower his head, feel around for the smoothest rock, and then toss it into the creek. It was quite mesmerizing. I was trying to mimic his movements and tried throwing my rocks farther than his. Then all of a sudden, I noticed that the little girl was behind a tree that was next to where my cousin was sitting. She seemed mesmerized by his movements too. This time, when she saw that I noticed her, she didn't hide her head. She looked at me and smiled. Then she pointed at my cousin. I was confused, but I nodded my head anyways. I thought maybe she was asking me if I knew him or something. My cousin looked over at me and asked me what I said. He thought I had said something to him. I told him that there was a little girl next to him. My cousin looked confused because he didn't quite hear me. I bent my head down to look at my own rocks, and when I looked up, I saw that the little girl was behind my cousin. It looked like she wanted to throw rocks with us, so I started to walk over to them, and then she pointed at my cousin again and I nodded. I was only a few steps away from the creek when I saw what she did next. She pushed my cousin right into the creek. All of his rocks fell out of his shirt and rolled into the river. The currents quickly swept him up. I got really scared because neither of us could swim. I looked up to see if the little girl would help me, but she was gone. I started yelling and screaming through tears that I kept having to wipe away. I didn't know what to do. I don't even remember seeing my cousin anymore. I just kept crying and screaming. The next thing I remember, some older boys ran over and jumped into the creek to help my cousin. I don't know if I passed out or if my memory is fuzzy, but I remembered that his apartment was filled with Hmong people. I was trying to find him and had to walk through people everywhere. It was really crowded in their house. Finally, I saw my cousin standing in the middle of the room. They had stripped him down to his white underwear and were rubbing his arms and legs. The women were crying and talking at the same time, so I didn't really understand what was going on. A few days later, I went over to my cousin's house to play with him. His mom said that he was sick. I went inside and found him laying on the couch. I brought over some marbles and was telling him about them. Eventually he got better, and we all moved away from that apartment complex. We never talked about what happened. I don't know if it was because he felt ashamed of being stripped down to his underwear or what, but he never brought it up. One night, we were drinking at my uncle's house and we were just talking about old times. I brought up the whole near drowning incident and it got really quiet. I said to him, "I wondered what happened to that girl who pushed you into the creek, dude." He replied, "What girl?" I started to tell my version of the story. He then looked at me and said, "Dude, you pushed me into the creek, man. I was lucky there was people nearby, otherwise I would have drowned." I started telling him how I saw the girl pointing at him and that I wasn't even close enough to push him in. He said that he saw me walking over to him, but when he looked down again, someone pushed him down and he figured it was just me. I was like, "It wasn't me, dude. I swear. There was a girl there and she pushed you, man. I saw the whole thing." Everyone around us was genuinely scared. I had goosebumps and the hair on my neck stood at attention. It was a pretty spooky realization. I don't know if what we talked about had anything to do with it, but A couple of weeks later, my cousin was hit by a drunk driver and didn't make it. It was a pretty bad accident. His car was completely totaled. I'm glad that I got to hang out with him before he passed away and we got to talk about old times. I'm glad that I got to tell him that I wasn't the one that pushed him in. I'd been living in my house in St. Paul for a few years, and nothing extremely bad has ever happened. But on this particular night, I couldn't sleep well. When I finally fell asleep, I had a dream that I was laying on my bed, on my back in complete darkness. I dreamt that a friend of mine was also sleeping at the foot of the bed on my floor. As I laid on the bed staring into the darkness, it felt like something or somebody stood up on my bed by my feet, but my feet was between their legs. I could feel the weight bearing down on my bed of whatever was standing there. I called over to my friend and asked if that was him, when he replied, no. The footsteps started making its way up towards my upper half. With every step, I could feel my bed going down where the feet was. I was having sleep paralysis. So I asked who it was and who was there, but there was no reply. Suddenly, I felt hair brush against my face as if something was hovering above me. I could just feel like somebody's face was hovering above mine. I broke free from this paralysis and jumped out of my bed and ran to my bedroom light switch. It wouldn't turn on. I opened my door and reached into the hallway to try that light switch, but nothing. I could somewhat see at this point because the moonlight was shining through my shades. So I ran over to my curtains and tried to roll them up to see what was on my bed. But no matter how many times I tried to roll up the curtains, it was a never-ending curtain. So instead of rolling the curtains, I quickly lifted the curtain and turned around to my bed, and there was a woman in red with her makeup smeared, crazy hair, and rotten flesh. She fell off my bed as soon as the light shone. I screamed, and I woke up screaming. I was 13 years old, young, curious, and stupid. It all started back in 2004 on Veterans Day, and my parents had left to go to Minnesota the very same day. Before their departure, my parents were both lecturing me that if they were not home, please don't go out causing trouble, just like a parent would do. I was in the car and didn't pay much attention to it. As soon as my parents took off to the airport, I asked my neighbor to take me on a joyride, and somehow we ended up at the Fresno Memorial Belmont Cemetery. I remember everything vividly on that Veterans Day at the cemetery. The weather was gloomy and dark with black clouds, a little windy with American flags on every veteran tombstones. It was 5 p.m. My neighbor wanted to pay his respects to his late grandpa who had served in the Secret War, so I left wandering on my own. As soon as I started to wander off, I heard what sounded like a crying voice from afar. The crying sounded like the voice at any Hmong funeral, and I hated those cries because it gave me chills all over my body. As I took another step, the crying was coming from everywhere. I wanted it to stop, and suddenly it went silent. As I opened my eyes, I ended up at a new burial site where you can see the shape of the coffin with dirt, a Hmong bow, an arrow, and a bowl on top of the burial site. I thought to myself, what was this? And my cousin came from behind me and screamed at me. He startled me, and I told him that I wanted to go home. It was about 6 p.m. when we were on the way back home. I could see my 2 younger sisters playing in the front porch. Normally, I stayed and played with them, but this time, I ran straight to my room and turned facing the wall. As I closed my eyes, I could sense that I wasn't alone because I felt someone was behind my back, lowering down their face. I kept my eyes closed while that thing took a deep breath and exhaled coldly into my left ear. After that, I stood right up and pulled my blanket sheet and covered myself right back to sleep. That night, I dreamt of a man in black with a pale face that wanted to marry me. I remembered saying no to that thing while he was chasing me in my dream. I woke up screaming in tears. Days later, I became very ill and laid in bed, which I didn't want to do because I would still dream of the same scene all over again, of that thing proposing and chasing me while I rejected him. My grandma was watching me while I was sick, and she noticed I wasn't getting any better even after taking medicine for days. She finally asked me if I went to go cause trouble again. My face was guilty, and she told me not to be scared and to tell her what happened before I got sick. After shamefully telling her the truth, she took action right away and called a shaman to come and bless me. After many blessings and rituals, I got better and was told not to go back to the cemetery again. My father passed away not too long ago. As the oldest child, I began experiencing strange occurrences after his death. Few weeks after his funeral, my younger sister and I saw something. We were baking muffins in the kitchen. As we were checking the muffins to make sure they were cooked properly, something got our attention, and we both stared at the cabinet located next to the stove. What we saw was unexplainable, and it was our very first time seeing such a thing. Suddenly, the cabinet opened on its own and slammed shut on its own. We screamed and sprinted out of the kitchen. We looked at each other, and my sister did not want to return to the kitchen. As for me, of course I was startled, but I didn't feel scared or in danger. I told my mother about it, but she didn't believe me and said I was just lying. But trust me, my sister and I saw it. Weeks later, I am a college student, and I just got out of my class around 4 p.m. I got into my car and drove to a supermarket to buy some groceries. I checked out, went to my car, put away the groceries, got into my seat and put on my seatbelt. After putting on my seatbelt, I looked up and noticed that my rearview mirror was facing all the way down. I did not do it. I didn't even touch my rearview mirror, nor was it facing down like that at all. I was very taken aback, but I remained calm and readjusted it into place. The supermarket was a good 10 minutes drive from home. When I was about 5 minutes away from home, I heard a loud pitch whistle in my right ear. And no, my ear was not ringing. It was an actual whistle. I wasn't scared, but I was confused. I slapped my ear and tried to focus on driving. Few months passed. This is where I knew I wasn't the only one seeing and hearing things. This happened for 2 nights in a row. On the first night, I stayed up till around 2 a.m. to finish my homework. My sister and I share a room together and we sleep on bunk beds. I finished up my homework and stood up to put away my laptop, but as soon as I stood up, I heard a yank at my doorknob. I thought it was one of my other siblings. I walked closer to my door and listened to see if it would happen again. I didn't hear anything, so I walked to my desk to put away my laptop. Right after that, I heard and saw my doorknob get yanked. I got so scared, I quickly locked it and climbed into my bed. I had a hard time falling asleep. Of course, it could have been any of my other siblings pulling pranks, but something told me it was something else. The next morning, I overheard my other siblings saying that they heard footsteps last night around 2 a.m. They told me they would hear it go back and forth in the hallway. That gave me the chills. On the second night, again I stayed up to do homework. This time, I was sitting at my desk, which was across from my door. It was around 1 a.m. in the morning. While I was doing my homework, I heard and saw the same thing. My doorknob was yanked. I tried to stay calm and tried to ignore it. Then, it happened again. I was scared and mad that something is messing with me. I stood up and slowly walked to my door. I took a deep breath and reached for my doorknob. I quickly turned my doorknob and opened my door. As soon as I opened my door, my other siblings all opened their door at the same time too. We all looked at each other and I could tell they were also scared. They told me they didn't hear their doors being yanked, but again, they heard the footsteps. I told my mom, and she somewhat looked afraid as well, but refused to tell me that it could be something paranormal. Till today, I cannot find a good explanation to any of these occurrences. I wonder if it has anything to do with my father. Is he just saying hi? Should I be afraid? Thank you for listening. So my girlfriend has been experiencing weird things for about a year or so. I'd say it started happening last summer. It began with sleep paralysis, and it seemed to happen every now and then. She would brush it off, but it would keep repeating. She would tell me about it, and I found it weird. I told her that maybe she should change her sleeping position, and she would do so. I heard growing up that it's never safe to sleep on your back with your legs and arms straight down, so I would warn her. She made sure to sleep on her sides or in some funky position so maybe the sleep paralysis can go away. But then, she would still experience sleep paralysis, even though she would be sleeping on her stomach or on her sides. At this point, I started to find it strange and I had no clue what to do. She sleeps on a bunk bed with her two younger sisters. My girlfriend would sleep on the bottom of the bunk while the two younger sisters slept on top. Every now and then, one of the younger sisters would sleep with my girlfriend. When my girlfriend's sister would sleep with her, she would notice that the sleep paralysis would go away. When the sister didn't sleep with her, she noticed that the sleep paralysis would always come back. When my girlfriend discovered this, she would then beg or ask her sister to sleep with her because she was so afraid that the sleep paralysis would come back, and maybe this time it might come back stronger. Sometimes, the sister would ignore her and not sleep with my girlfriend, and my girlfriend would stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning until she's really tired so that she can just knock out. One of her experiences that she told me had freaked her out. She was sleeping by herself on the bottom bunk and just napping in the middle of the day. Out of nowhere, she started hearing drums being played, like the drums that you would hear at a funeral. In her head, she knew it wasn't right to be hearing that. She said that she heard the drums being played right next to her. In another incident, she recently woke up from a nap during the day. Out of nowhere, she went into a deep sleep. At that instant, she knew she was having sleep paralysis and tried waking herself up. She couldn't move, but she could talk inside of her head. Out of nowhere, she saw her sister and it was like a dream. No matter how much my girlfriend called out for her sister didn't react at all. It was as if she didn't hear her. In fact, she had no face but was dressed the exact same as her sister. She was just walking around and cleaning the room with a vacuum. My girlfriend was freaked out. Out of nowhere, the other sister comes in and sits on the bed with my girlfriend. My girlfriend was freaking out and asked her sister to wake her up, but she then noticed that she also didn't have a face. That's when suddenly one of my cousins showed up in my girlfriend's dream. She warned my girlfriend that there was a bad man there and that my girlfriend should stay on the lookout and be careful. He's dangerous and capable of anything. My girlfriend takes a quick notice, but she still can't get up and is still stuck in sleep paralysis and in her dream. A new scene appears as she's still stuck in her bed. She looks straight at her feet and sees a man with no head. She could only see from the neck down. He comes on top of her and starts holding down my girlfriend. My girlfriend tried hard to push him away and to wake herself up, but she couldn't do it. The man with no head then starts throwing punches at my girlfriend's stomach, and she said she could actually feel the pain. After a long fight with the man, he then leaves my girlfriend alone. My cousin comes back into the scene and comforts my girlfriend. She gives my girlfriend a hug, and my girlfriend actually thought that she was awake. But then all of a sudden, she whispered into my girlfriend's ear, and my girlfriend realized that the voice didn't sound like hers. When she looked at my cousin, she then saw that my cousin also had no face. At this point, my girlfriend jolted up from her dream. She then reached for her phone and started texting me all about her dream. She said that it felt too real.